Sweet. So I will instantly reframe the question from can Europe lead physical AI to how can Europe lead physical AI and how will we lead physical AI? Because I have a lot of questions about this. We will do a quick round of introductions. I will start with myself. My name is Andreas. I'm an investor in mostly robotics. I think we're currently one of the most active investors in robotics in early stage in Europe. I also do policy work in Brussels, so if anybody of you wants to know anything about politics, come to me and traumatize me, because I work on a lot of those topics as well. And I will head over to David.
Hi everyone, my name is David, founder and CEO of NEURA Robotics. What we do is we build basically cognitive robots which can hear, see, feel, think, and react fully autonomously. And for that, it's a little bit more than just robots. It's basically the brain behind and the platform, so everyone can adjust it and contribute to it. That's what we're doing.
Hey everyone, great to be here. I'm Anastasis, co-founder and co-CEO of Runway. We're a foundation model company that's focused on video generation and world models. So kind of building kind of end-to-end kind of systems for simulating, understanding, kind of interacting with the real world. A lot of our focus for a long time has been video generation for content creation, for making films, making ads, making any kind of content. And over the past few years, we've been also focusing on robotics, how kind of the same models that are used kind of pre-trained on large-scale video data be used to actually predict actions that a robot can take in the world, help generate data for robotics to train.
This is Vicky, based in Seattle. So Centific, we focus on training data sets and also provide a good quality of the benchmarking data sets, especially working with hyperscaler and also physical AI world models. So that's including, what is the egocentric data, teleoperation data, and also real-to-sim data. Anything that you can think about and to help robotics and to see things, understand things, and reason things, and interact and working with humans. And we focus on the global skills, so across into 33 different countries, and heavy, putting on the regulations, data sovereignty into our consideration too.
Hey all, this is Ankit. I lead the international business for Uber AI Solutions. So somewhere in between a ride and a burger, we ended up building this massive network of infrastructure around data operations, really helping companies get to the ground truth, be it long-tail edge case scenarios in autonomous vehicle, generally or physical AI more broadly, or in the Gen AI world to sort of understand how you can train your models better with human in the loop, really scaling at 70 plus markets that we are operating today. And yeah, good to be here.
Cool. So I have basically three big topics I want to cover. Number one is the US versus Europe. Number two is China versus Europe. And number three is training data specifically, because right now we're in this moment of like reasoning models and vision models and all this kind of stuff actually moving out of the uncanny valley, and like training data is a big part of that. But before we do that, David, you recently raised what I think is the biggest round for any German startup so far. Is it correct?
Yes, correct.
What did you do in that evening afterwards?
Yeah, basically focusing right now, right away focusing already on the next things. We will have a celebration actually this Friday, so it came a little late, but that's how it is. I think the first thing we did is like we came back to the company and we started to restructure the company actually completely. So we had 1 week of completely restructuring and now going forward and building the physical AI company for the world, and that's what we're doing.
I can also imagine like that. So you have been doing this for quite some time now, and this hasn't been like an easy journey, and like now also like this massive round. That must have been like an insane moment for the whole team, right?
Yes, it was, for sure. It was a milestone, let's say like that. It's like, I think everyone in our company is aware that it's just a step between. I mean, we're not done yet, we're far away from there. But we are now, let's say, in the stage, I think there weren't so many German companies on the stage. And I think it is, for us, it was a huge milestone simply because it was it was always said it is impossible to do something like that out of Germany and Europe. And I think to build something which is impossible, which just makes us satisfied. So we are having fun, and at the same time knowing also how much responsibility it takes also for the next companies coming after us. So, and this is also what we are focusing right now, just succeeding, so others after us have it easier than us.
It's always impossible until somebody simply does it.
Exactly.
Why is physical AI important for Europe from your point of view?
Yeah, I think I'm slightly biased, but I do believe like physical AI is actually in my opinion, the last big chance actually for Europe actually having built something which is important enough or big enough also going forward, like to contribute actually also to let's say be important to the world. And why is this so important? Simply because that's the only thing why Europe exists, and same time also why we're having, let's say, peace, or we had peace, and at the same time also prosperity, like the wealth we have built was mainly built on our technological advancement, and because the world was needing things we are building. And I think physical AI is again a chance for us, big enough, important enough, because here we are talking about, let's say, a technology which is basically covering the biggest contribution of, let's say, the global GDP, or so I'm talking about physical labor, like of 65% of the global GDP is actually, how to say it, done by physical labor work. And this is, I think, a huge opportunity for us to build something which is important and, let's say, how to say it, yeah, that's it. Or
Anastasis, you're originally from Greece. Could you have started Runway in Greece?
No.
To put this into magnitudes, what kind of amounts of money do you need for your current world models?
So we've raised in total about 800 million at this point, and that a lot of that goes to research and scaling the video models that we train. I would say Runway is a special story because I think we could only have started in New York out of all the places. Like the New York, we started in grad school in New York, and New York has this intersection of creative industries, technology, advertising, media, in a way that's very difficult to find anywhere else. And so New York has been a big part of like the Runway origin story. At the same time, a lot of our research was done in Europe. Like we have a research team in the UK, and now we're opening another office in Paris. I think our first 3 researchers were kind of all European. A lot of the progress in image and video generation actually has happened in Europe, both kind of happening inside Runway, but also outside Runway, in places like DeepMind or kind of here. There's a lot of research happening in Paris as well. So I think the story of like where actually foundation models are trained, where research is happening, is there is a common misconception that it's all happening in the Bay Area. That's not actually the case at all, as we prove being kind of in New York and Europe. And I think the talent that's here, the level of rigor, academic rigor, in physical AI, the kind of deployment base that's in Europe makes it, gives a much larger opportunity, I think, for Europe to succeed in physical AI, maybe compared to the pure world of bits. That's where I think a lot of the progress has happened in the Bay Area.
I used to live 5-6 years in the Bay Area, and I always joked that US startups are just rappers for European, Chinese, and Indian talent. And it feels like with a lot of the AI labs that like core teams are usually, like very frequently core people there are European. From your point of view as like a Greek who moved to New York, what would you wish for Europe to change so that the next Greek AI researcher like can start the next Runway in Europe?
I think there's a few things. So I guess a big important thing, which I think is improving, is kind of the funding environment. I think those, especially the scale-up rounds that the AI companies are getting, are very difficult to. There's not that level of kind of capital that's found in Europe at the moment. That's changing. We've had like really big, successful rounds happening, both on the model side and the hardware side. But that's a big important piece. Like if you want to train foundation models, like you can't do that. Scaling laws are real. You need to scale compute. You need to scale data, and that's difficult. That requires a lot of investment in those areas. And then I think I think especially as we, I think there's at the same time some opportunities for Europe to stay ahead. I think the level of collaboration that's happening with different governments in Europe and kind of partnerships with different governments, and there is some nice kind of competition between like which government will be more AI forward, which government will partner with AI companies. That creates a really nice environment, I think, for European companies to leverage compared to the US, which is a more monolithic kind of environment. So there is some opportunities now with AI for companies to kind of be more kind of strategic partners of governments in a way that didn't really make sense with like the SaaS companies of the previous decade.
Ankit, you're currently, first of all, can you explain to people the difference between Uber and Uber AI services? I think a lot of people are aware. And then second of all, you're currently bringing physical AI to Europe, actually, especially in Munich with the robotaxis and multiple other cities. Can you talk about this for a second?
So it's funny we're sitting in Paris today because if you walk down the memory lane back in 2008, this was the place where Uber was born on a snowy night. This was where the concept of the founders realizing that they couldn't find a taxi was actually where Uber was born. So, you know, when we started to scale Uber, we quickly realized that we can't just rely on sort of the third-party providers. If you were to get your ETA right, if you were to make sure that the driver is arriving where the rider is, and so on and so forth. So we spun up an internal team to really start thinking about data and collecting real-world ground truth data to train and the algorithms back then, today known as more models. And over time, that sort of expanded into the labeling, into Uber Eats use cases. And last 2 decades, we've really been building that for our in-house use case. 2024, we externalized that because we started to realize how important it is, especially in the physical AI world, but also in the Gen AI world. Data is super important. Not just about access to real-world ground truth in 70+ markets that we operate, but also more importantly, how do you kind of make use of that data? So us running the biggest gig workforce, we really truly bring that expert layer. And I think in the broad scheme of things, Uber's vision has evolved to not just run the biggest marketplace of, you know, moving people and goods from point A to point B, but also evolve to running the biggest gig marketplace for anyone and any task. You're a PhD with a lot of specific degrees, with specialized skill set. You may need that capability to train certain specific models. And that's what Uber AI solution essentially is. To answer your second question, so if I take a step back, you know, in 2020, we sort of did a transaction for our own autonomous 1P model and moved to a pure partnership model because we believe our end goal is to have every robotaxi deployed on our marketplace. And as a result, today we partner with almost all of the companies out there that are building robotaxis. So, for example, we recently announced AutoBrain's partnership in Germany with Momenta, for example, in Germany as well, and in Spain with WeRide. I think our goal is to kind of make sure that we partner with everyone. And this is where Europe comes in interesting because, you know, you've got some companies that are building just the hardware, some companies that are just building the software, the AV 2.0. And then if you think about the OEMs, they're building the actual body. So I think we as Uber are trying to play the orchestration layer, so to speak, the connective tissue, from demand generation all the way to fleet and infrastructure. But before that, actually really providing the long tail edge case scenarios. So next time you may take an Uber in the US, you may not know, but there are sensors fitted outside that are really helping collect data sets to train AV models too. So, yeah.
So if I understood it correctly, like because Momentum is, for example, like a company from Beijing, like Uber is a company from the States. Lyft is now acquired a bunch of companies in Europe and is like introducing, I think, self-driving from Baidu, if I remember correctly. So where's, like you just said it, but like just to repeat it, like where do you think in that stack is like the Europe's role?
I think Europe plays in the AV space, physically, when we talk about physical AI, plays a role to A, be the orchestration layer, B, I think also the OEMs. If you think about all the OEMs outside of China and US, and more importantly, all the leading OEMs are actually based out of Europe. So there's a lot of sensor configuration, there's a lot of calibration that goes on, and there's a lot of settings that needs to happen in the hardware setup. And that I think that's where Europe will lead. a lot. So we've announced partnership with NVIDIA, Stellantis, Wave, and us coming together. So that's a perfect example because Wave is building the end-to-end model. Stellantis brings the OEM. NVIDIA brings the processing and the data piece, and we bring the data factory, the real-world data. We bring the data annotation layer, and we also bring the infrastructure of operating and operational management.
Before we jump into OEMs, which is a good topic on this one actually, Vicky, you also, as you called it, like your data factory company, you're selling globally. Like, do you see a difference in what customers demand? And also, do you see industries or platforms currently emerging that people don't have on their radar yet?
We see that this whole world, physical AI keeps evolving. It's on a daily basis. I'll put into different layers. So first of all, when we talk about infrastructure readiness, we're mainly dealing with older devices. I'll give you an example that we recently visited OEMs, major OEMs hubs. We see that it's not just producing robotics of bodies anymore. They are talking about egocentric devices, smart gloves, where that they can measure your fingers and the bones level, so that it gives you density and depth of what is the data set is needed. So all these things, not like a GTP3 training, where there's a large data set existing in the world. Today, those data doesn't exist. So that's the number one challenge. So all these manufacturers and also labs and trying to catch up. What is the right devices set up that is needed for training the physical AI ground model? Second thing is now, when they are dealing with the models, nobody has to figure out what is the data needed. So for example, if anybody catch NVIDIA's recently release, they announced Cosmos 3 reasoning model. They also announced that they are trying to partner with the people, industry researchers in the industry, trying to see what is the benchmark data sets. It means that they haven't figured out what is the kind of data is needed, rather than the quantity of the data sets. So that's a completely different way compared with the GTP training. Third way, if you talk about academic world, Philly's lab or any of this world and leading labs, they are still trying to big bet on whether they should big bet on the teleoperation skill set and to get the data sets or the egocentric data, or real to theme model, the simulators. So nobody has to figure out that. So there's not a no answer that people can follow the path. You have to just be curious and then figure out the answers together.
Let's jump to OEM and hardware. So there used to be a saying in the last few years that's thankfully going a little bit away because it makes me leave Zoom calls with founders, which is hardware is a commodity, we focus on the software layer. David, do you agree? Is hardware a commodity?
It's not. So, and I think, yeah, it's good if the other think that way, but it's actually not. The reason for it is very simple. I think even talking about AI and data, or like if you're talking about physical AI, then the big difference is there is no data for that like existing. Maybe there is right now some in production, but there is not really a lot of data existing. And the other difference is actually the data comes actually out of what? The sensorization. So, and if you do not have the right sensorization on, you will never have a brain understanding anything of it because you never had the data for it. So, and that's actually where we think why we actually built, first of all, also the physical embodiment for the robots, and the second also like different embodiments. The reason for that is actually that we do need to define the core. One is the sensorization, let's say the fingertips, like the sensitivity on the fingertips. The other is like vision. The other part is audio, so you have like a multimodal version. And then the other part is actually the compute. Because even if you tell me like there is already everything set for that, it's again something, it's good if others think that way, but it isn't actually, because if you're talking about physical AI, the difference is actually that you're in a physical world which is dynamic, so it's actually moving and it's changing. So it means actually you need to be reactive, and this, you can't learn that all with your brain. So you do need to have like also a nervous system, and that's also why we're working a lot on, and it's what you're seeing right now in our recent funding round, is like we focused on sensorization, partners for that, strategic partners for the compute infrastructure, brain, nervous system, and then actually the cloud compute and distribution, and then going further, even for machine economy. So it means also the whole transactions. How do you transfer know-how, like, and how do you distribute it? Actually, let's say in a way that everyone can actually contribute and at the same time benefit from it. So I think, again, sorry, I took long for that, but it's actually not commodity yet. So we do need to define it, and I think and it will be one day, but and even there it will just get better and better. But we are not there yet.
Also, like especially in the current wave of startups, if you're trying to innovate some specific industry, let's say farming, you can't just say, let's wait for a Chinese company to build an automated tractor. You have to build the automated tractor, and like likely that like half of your product development is in hardware and not in software alone, you know. So you also like very famous now for sourcing mostly, if not completely, in Europe. Is this true?
Yes, for the humanoid, we're right now trying to source almost 100%. So it means there is some rare materials, whatever, which we can't like get from Europe yet. But the like older production and assembling, everything is done in Europe. And we're focusing like on that to build the supply chain for that. So actually, we are transforming an existing supply chain of automotive into basically robotics.
Where do you see the trick to be here competitive with China, and like how much full stack verticalization do you need to do as NEURA?
So I think here it's important that, like, first, like, we are not against China and whatever. So I think right now it's more to focus to build the whole ecosystem around us to actually be able to build an economic pillar which is independent and at the same time strong enough and actually to actually arise from Germany and Europe. I think it's important for the beginning. I think in the longer term, I do believe that it will be, let's say, global sourcing. I hope it will start, like, because I'm still a believer in the globalization, even the world's right now deglobalizing. But I do believe in globalization because that's also the core for Europe. But for that, we need to build first the technologies which is important enough, which the world needs, which is better than something on other parts of the world. And then actually, I think this is, and then we contribute again, like, to the globalization part. And I do believe we will source everywhere. So, and the cool thing about physically and robotics is actually, but it's a huge topic if I start, but it's actually that it's the only way, in my opinion, to actually, let's say, get production back to Europe, or in the same time also to US. I mean, Donald Trump has a good idea, like bringing all the production back to US, but the difficulty he will have is that the skill sets are not there yet. So it means actually, it's the same actually transferring, like Apple transferring basically the production from China to India. It didn't work out the way they wish and they expected. Or the reason for that is there's different skill sets in the population, or so. And this is, I think, the difference in physically and robotics, that it doesn't matter where you are, you know, on which part of the planet. So the only way is, in my opinion, that's actually the future vessel of know-how, and you can transfer it wherever you want on the planet. And I think it will contribute to the globalization again.
I want to chime in for that point. I feel like that Europe has a really good chance to, in terms of the motivation and needs, get leading into this physical AI world. The thing is, if we look at the Asian market, US market, yes, there's a fantastic companies, and especially in China, the robots can do anything. Dancing, you know, movement, and nursing the people, anything you can imagine. But the thing is, if you look at how they make the money, very few companies make the money. There are probably between 20 or 23 companies really famous, and including some of the great companies on the floor. If you ask them, yes, valuation is very much double digits, but the commercial model is very thin. The problem they have is the labor is very cheap there. If you're making a robot which is going to help you to clean your dish and mop your floor, there's nobody in Asia is going to buy the robots. And they can just hire a nanny and people assistant doing that. Versus that US, what we see is there's huge labs doing all these fantastic models. They haven't really figured out the answer yet, but they haven't also quite figured out how to land the commercialized model. They are trying to get the manufacturers, so there's a very limited robotics and OEMs and hardware ready for them. So that's a different focus. So when I look at Europe, I feel like the manufacturers here, the verticals and healthcare, all these needs is here. And all Europe needs to do is to catch up all these devices, ecosystems, and infrastructure readiness, and then get the data, which is not a rocket science. So that's just in my opinion.
It's a good point, actually. Like, David, what is needed to make the vast supply chain in Europe more accessible to startup founders?
It's the belief of the existing supply chain, or I mean, the reason for us being so, let's say, going so deep, like in even developing our own sensors, gearboxes, motors, whatever, has the reason for that was that there was. Let's say the whole supply chain, existing supply chain, was not believing in that story of robotics and that this will scale one day. But I think this time's changed because you do see that, like, especially like in Germany, like the supply chain of automotive is really like, I think they have now a lot of energy actually, or a lot of hope in a lot of little things where they can actually, how to say it, find a new market for them. I think they have to. There's no other ways for them to survive. They have to find new markets and things which they actually can believe in, bet on, and actually go inside in the same time, like not just for the investors, but also for themselves to actually sustain in that space. So I think it's getting accessible because simply there is a need, there's a pressure, there's like hope, like a lot of hopelessness, or like in that space of automotive supply chain, and I think and they're ready to believe in even little things and drive them there. So I think it's a good time right now.
I mean, this is the interesting thing. We used to outsource to China because it's cheaper labor. Then we realized then we now outsource to them because they are the only ones that have like on that detail and that depth and breadth the supply chain. And now they're starting to automate all of that. And the question is like, we should just use the automation to nearshore again. And we talk like to multiple startups that do a lot of industries that we thought about like pretty much gone to China and to Asia, like coming back now because you can actually fully verticalize and fully automate that whole process. I have a question because David said something before about data and like data not being available in manufacturing and so on and so on. And this might be a little bit pointed question, but the reason why word models are so popular right now and like make such a huge progress right now is because there's like a vast amount of massive general data that you can use to train the word models and very little specific data to just like do small thing for a specific purpose.
I think that's a good summary. So I think the biggest problem in robotics, at least on the software intelligence layer, is generalization. You want a robot that's able to not just perform the task that it's been pre-programmed to do, but actually be able to follow arbitrary kind of instructions that are in natural language and be able to adapt to situations that it hasn't seen before, it hasn't been explicitly trained on. Otherwise, you're not going to build actual systems that can operate in the real world and can you won't be able to build humanoids that are in the home and can deal with all the complexity of the different layouts, different environments, different household tasks, kind of a robot that will follow you around, kind of help, go to the supermarket, come back to the house, like perform, basically deal with the complexity of daily life. And in order to get there, I think if we can only get there if we train a model just on a single embodiment, a single form factor, I don't think we're going to get there. We need to build a model that can transfer from essentially human data. There is a vast amount of kind of real-world video of humans performing different tasks in the world, and if we can leverage that knowledge and bootstrap models that then need only very little amounts of data from actual robotic embodiments, then I think that's a much faster path to getting there compared to actually collecting that same scale of data with kind of on just robotic embodiments. And so that's the bed of world models is you can bootstrap and kind of cold start those models by just pre-training on massive amounts of kind of human data of humans performing different tasks in the world and learning from that both kind of the diversity of kind of tasks that humans care about, learn about physics, learn about kind of how the world works, and then use that as a starting point for any work that you do in robotics, use that to generate data, use those models directly to adapt them as action models that predict the actions that the robots would take. So we think that's a much faster and really the only path, I would say, to getting there.
Ankit, I work in Brussels, you work at Uber. I give you 1 minute to become my anger speaker about regulation in Europe. Please go.
Interesting. You know, I have a different perspective on regulation when it comes to physical AI. Actually, if you talk about general tech, yes, more regulation slows things down, and it's sort of the death spiral. But if you think about physical AI, the biggest challenge for scaling is safety and scaling it at a point where it becomes more efficient. And I think Europe leading the way from a regulation point of view might feel like it's taking a step back. But if I think about 2-year horizon or 3-year horizon, I actually think because the regulations are being set now, scalability in the future is going to become much more important. And I actually, so my view is that what's happening in the regulation world from a regulatory world from a physical AI perspective, it's a good thing out eventually that I think is going to accelerate the deployment, for example, not just in the AV world, but in general physical AI world, because I think to your point about data, right, I think world models, so AV 1.0 to 2.0 is a perfect example. A lot of people are now using general data to train parts of the model, and then they need some long tail edge case scenarios to train very specific data types for their specific cities, deployment, and so on. I think regulation there comes in very handy because that will allow you to actually accelerate, let's say, deployment. You can launch Munich tomorrow, you can launch Frankfurt next week. You don't need to collect tons of data, and I think regulatory framework allows you to do that. Sorry, no. I'm not going to be angry, but I think that's my
that was not what I was
different.
hoping for. But it's, yeah, fair enough. You have to represent Uber here, I guess. Vicky, what is because like we spoke about self-driving, we spoke about world models of large language. What is like an absolutely unique data set that you're recently selling more and more of that you haven't thought about? Like most likely most people here don't have on their horizon.
If I'm just looking at H1 of this year, we see that there's several waves change. January to March, we see there's a huge spikes and that all of a sudden companies jump into the egocentric data. What does it mean is you just have a head-mounted devices and put it on the top of your head and start to collect the data. But very soon we see that these companies after March, they all died because of 2 reasons. Number one, those data lacks of depth. And there's an angle, 3D angle, it's just not there. Number 2 is the data regulation. Right now, there's more and more countries put strict restrictions in how to ship the data globally. So that's another thing. And then after March, we see the waves start to shift to more like a 3D data versus even today's 4D data. Plus, there is a spatial movement data with sensing involvement. So what does it mean is there is a higher requirement to get the correct devices so that it's just resolve the first step of the problem. But then second problem is where you're going to collect the data, where you're going to create the data. I'll give you a very detailed number. When we look at GPT, Gen AI, right now that's most of the challenges is stay with the post-trainings and RTLs and SFTs and all these things. But the data annotation is not a huge challenge. Here in physical AI, most of the companies still talk about training data sets. They are not getting into the annotation yet. So that means nobody has to figure out how to label the 3D 21 points and hand tracking data. This is just one of the examples. So stay with that track. We see that now the second wave, people start to change the devices, but they're still like changing from egocentric data sets to smart gloves. Look at the whole world. How many companies has a smart gloves to figure out? And that's just one of the challenge. Very soon that you see that there's a combinations from VR data sets and the smart glove data sets. And so that's it just I feel like we're still on the early journey in figure out what is the data is the most effective data. And then we'll get the annotations and how are you going to produce the most effective data sets rather than 2 hours out of the 8 hours, and how are you going to increase to 6 out of 8 hours? So those are the very tactical problems we see every day.
And it's still the very early days. I want to make two things. Number one, I want to make a prediction. I think next year it will be completely normal that we will talk about robotic startups doing fully verticalized production in Europe at competitive prices to China. This is a bold claim. I stay by it. No, I literally stay by it. Like I see a lot of stealth companies right now. I literally stay by it, and I also think that NEURA is basically like leading, especially in the supply chain, to make this happen. And number two, the second thing I want to do is I want to thank you all for the discussion, and thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.